Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and today we're going to be talking about something that's very topical, and that is the trends in the rising cost of construction. And in order to do that, I'm going to introduce to you Marty Sadlier from MCG Quantity Surveying. Welcome aboard, Marty.
Yeah, hi Rob, thanks for having me.
Mate, no problem at all. So, firstly, quantity surveying. A lot of people don't even know what a quantity surveyor is. Why don't we start right there and go, what is a QS? And I guess more importantly, why would we need one? And who is MCG in that process?
Yeah, so quantity surveying's been around for a long time. Back in the sort of early pyramid days, it was known as the measurer of royal works, probably a title that I like a bit more than quantity surveying, but it's certainly been around for a long time. Back then it was more about estimating works after a job was done. So it was really brought to the forefront, would you believe it, on the back of the Great Fires of London, 1666 for the history buffs, which was a fire that started in the back of a bakery in London that decimated London. The rise of the quantity surveyor on the back of that was that they had to rebuild this city, and they had so many buildings they had to do. They needed someone to help quantify what the costs were going to be to pay the trades. And that was really the rise of the new term of quantity surveying. But it was always done post-construction. So they would wait till the building was totally finished, and then they'd get a quantity surveyor in to work out exactly what products were used, and that's what the trades got paid for. So they didn't get paid for wastage or their time and efforts. It was the finished product. And it wasn't until the 18th century that it changed, where the end of the 18th century and start of the 19th century, where builders started to get a little bit caught on about competition. So they wanted to get some idea of their pricing before they started construction. And that was really where the modern quantity surveyor comes, where they tend to be involved pre-construction, not post-construction. I was a builder and I was doing a lot of estimating and decided I wanted to go into quantity surveying. So started MCG Quantity Surveyors. MCG Quantity Surveyors, we started in 2011, been doing it for 20 years now. I'm a fellow of the Australian Institute of Quantity Surveyors. I'm an international accredited expert in quantity surveying and quantum merit. I am also a RICS member, and I'm the current president of the New South Wales Association of Quantity Surveyors. MCG has 9 offices across Australia. In 2018, we were awarded or on the list of the fastest 100 growing companies in Australia. And the last 2 years, we've been awarded Quantity Surveyor of the Year. So certainly we've tried to pack in a fair bit into our little journey thus far. But yeah, quantity surveying as a whole is something, if we went to a coffee shop, 2 people out of 30 would know what it is. It doesn't have the limelight that fighter pilots get, but we're working on it.
Very good. And no, this is just an assumption, but I'm assuming that you're the M in the MCG. Is that correct?
Yeah. I'm the MCG stands for M Consulting Group. So as males on a weekend, you start a business. We didn't give much forethought into what that trading name would end up being an acronym of, and now compete with one of the biggest stadiums in Australia. So it's hard for the Google rankings.
Yeah, fair enough. Unless you want to fill a stadium full of people for a football match. Yeah. Mate, so we're here to talk about the rising cost of construction. It's been something that's been happening for quite some time, causing a heck of a lot of challenges and fear in the market for, I guess, the ultimate buyer who doesn't want to, I guess, go into a build, and also for, I guess, any potential developer that's actually sitting out there, because they just don't know how to predict I guess, the costs, because they've risen so much.
Yeah.
Why don't we, before we go into what's happened, let's have a look at why it's happened. What's actually caused this sudden, I guess, burst of costs in the last 18 months to 2 years?
Yeah, look, I think the easiest and most simplistic, quick answer was a term penned by millions of people across the world, is COVID. And that really, like anything, there's the straw that breaks the camel's back. So it was there were things already in train that was happening, right? And that really just brought everything to the forefront and blew everything up. But really, COVID really was a steroid, to the increase in construction costs. So what that really did was, Australia shut down very quick, locked its borders. But the problem with that is that a lot of our building materials come from overseas. So suddenly we had time delays. So what we've seen during COVID and even now is we saw a real decline in labour. So we're short about 150,000 labour positions in the construction industry at the moment. We've seen hundreds of building companies go under this year alone that are no longer. So we've got a supply and demand issue. And we saw things like home builder rolled out by the government as a stimuli to keep the construction industry moving, which, yes, it did an awesome job of. But the reality is the downside to that was builders took on too much work. And you can understand why, right? They wanted to make sure they had work for the next couple of years because they were really under threat. But they took on too much, and they then couldn't deliver that for the price that they went in at. So that really hurt them as well. We saw the same issues in other countries. We couldn't get materials out of there as well. As I said, we're down on labour. We've seen a lot of builders leave the market. It was in last financial year, there was 3,917 companies that went into liquidation in Australia, and 28% of them were builders. So the reality is we don't have enough builders to get competitive pricing. They're struggling to get materials. They're struggling to get labour to be able to complete the task. And by virtue, they're trying to change things around in contracts. So the reality is it became a bit of a melting pot. And then just as we were getting out of that sort of COVID and thinking that we were getting our head around how it may work, we had floods and bushfires and East Coast lows on the back of the La Nina that took out and damaged around 20,000 homes, predominantly between Queensland and New South Wales. And that in itself means that we're not just trying to build new homes now as developers. We also need these materials and builders to rectify existing properties that need to be rebuilt or repaired through damage. So the problem was, we saw materials having to come from other states just for that, and then builders have got so much insurance work at the moment, they're not taking on new projects or wanting to do development stuff. So it was a real melting pot of a number of things.
And that's all just in Australia alone. And
Yep.
As you said, COVID was actually a global pandemic. So we weren't the only ones that had, issues with supply chain.
Yep.
I guess there were global supply chain issues all the way around the board.
Yep.
I guess the cost of shipping containers went up at least fivefold that I'm aware
Yep.
of.
Yeah, and 80% of the building materials that come to Australia come by sea. So when you've got big increases with costs of shipping containers, and then the time frame because of a decreased workforce on docks, they then also had a delay of sitting there for so long. The world went up on the world list of construction cost increases of about 50 cities. Sydney was the first Australian city, to hit that list of 50 cities, and we sit in the middle, about city number 25. So there was another 24 cities above us in regards to increased construction costs. So we certainly weren't doing it alone.
Yeah. So I guess the net outcome, limited access to supplies, which means that the cost of supplies went up. Yep. Limited access to labour, which meant the cost of labour went up. Equally, the two of those compounded means wait times had to occur, so timelines blew out. And when you combine all of that, projects blowing out, builders with fixed price contracts, builders then started to go broke, and a whole bunch of other things, and it all starts to cascade. And as a couple of builders start to go under, then I guess that starts to create some fear.
I think to bring it back to our domestic borders, I think the case in point with all of that is that 18 months ago, the dearest city in Australia to build in was Perth, because the borders got locked down. So the reality was it was dearer to build a house in Perth than it was to build a place in Sydney.
Yeah. Well, they weren't letting anyone, road or freight, get in.
Yeah.
But yeah, crazy stuff. So what were the key elements when we break down a house into all of its individual bits? What were the key components where we saw the biggest increase in costs go up?
The biggest increase overall we saw straight away was timber, because the reality was it wasn't just because of the supply and demand. It wasn't just the actual product cost, it was also the time delay that came with it, which inherently increases the overall cost. So timber trusses and frames went out to about a 48-week lead time. Now, when you talk about a high volume builder that will turn around from start to finish a construction of a house in 24 to 26 weeks, when you've got to wait 48 weeks for the timber, which, let's be honest, after they build a slab, they clear the site, they build a slab, they're standing frames, it's going up within a few weeks of starting to site. That long lead item is now nearly a year. That was a big one. That really hurt. Concrete and steel went up, mainly the steel component, so the reinforcement mesh in that went up, and that was by virtue of a lot of our reinforcement steel and steels coming from overseas. The iron ore gets dug out of the ground here, but it goes overseas to get manufactured. So we saw a delay there. Certainly, we saw it in electrical. So the price of copper and copper wiring went up. Once again, mainly because it has to come in from external. So the problem was there, we needed to wait a long time. The problem with that then, because of the inherent supply and demand, cheaper products started coming in. So we then started seeing copper wiring coming in for electrical cabling for fit out or rough out that actually didn't meet code, had to get stripped out. So it didn't have the right insulation qualities around it, the sheathing. So there was double works required. Now that's just more time delay.
Yeah, yeah, and you touched on, I guess, timber being one of the biggest ones. Australia is a supplier of timber. I think we can only meet about 40% of our own demand. Is that right?
Yeah. So what we're basically seeing, we've seen an increase in demand in the last 2 decades of 40%. So we need 40% more timber than we've currently got. The problem with that is that over the last decades, we haven't planted any more increased acreages or hectares of forestry timber in this country. So we haven't increased our product, but we've increased our demand exponentially. 2 years ago, we lost over 130,000 hectares to bushfires. Now, these softwoods we predominantly use in this country, so your pines and those kind of things, they take 20 years to mature. So even if we plant more today, we're not going to be able to use them for 20 years. So when we lose 130,000 hectares 2 years ago, for us to replant that and then be able to use that, we've got to wait some time. So because of that, we're not keeping up with our demand here. We have to rely on products to come in. A lot of that comes in from Canada, from a timber, but America was going through their biggest boom since the GFC. They're up about 25% on building approvals during COVID. So the problem with that is that Canadian softwoods were going to America. They weren't coming here. So we then had to look at alternative building methods. So we started to see a bit more of a rise in steel. So your steel stud work or steel frame properties. Yeah, they might be good for termite type scenarios, but once again, because people needed to start buying that, the price for steel frames then went up. And there were builders that were renting out industrial sheds and stockpiling timber. It became a commodity. It became a real something to trade with.
A bit like toilet paper.
Yeah. Oh, and if we can remember back, you walk into a Coles, you couldn't find toilet paper or flour, but you'd go into a Bunnings and you couldn't see insulation or timber on the shelves.
Yeah, crazy times. So net effect, how much has it caused the cost of construction to go up in the last 18 to 24 months?
Yeah, okay. So there's overall, look, it went up a lot. The reality is, up until about June last year, so June 2022, it had gone up about 20.5%. So let's just say 20%. Since June last year to now, it's gone up around 11%. Now, it's not just as simple as saying, well, that together is 31%, right? Because there's been some changes in and around, but we've seen about 11% since like the financial year. I guess that's just finished. The last financial year was about 11%. But previously to that, over the bigger journey of the COVID period, it was around 20.5.
Yeah, that's massive. Yeah. Seriously big numbers, and more to come. What's the forecast for, I guess, the next, let's just say, to the end of the year?
Yep. So the next 6 months, the Australian Institute of Quantity Surveyors has published that the rise will be an additional 4.4 to 4.8%. So in round figures, 4.5 to 5% further cost increases. A lot of that is predominantly around being able to get these projects started. So it's about time delay and getting access to materials and builders. So there will be a rectification that will come in the market, which is always a lag. So what I mean there is, if we start to see plasterboard or certain materials coming back in price in the next 6 months, we won't see that hit our construction job until the job that hasn't been quoted yet. Because if a job has already been locked in to be built next year, they've already agreed on that contract sum, right? So even though that price might come back, we won't see it from an end user until newer jobs start to come in.
Yeah, interesting. So that's, let's just round that to say even numbers that say 5% to the end of the year.
Yeah.
What about into I guess 2024?
Yeah. So if we went to the midway point of 2024, they're talking about it's coming back into a more predominantly a CPI or a BPI, so consumer price index. In the building and developing term, we try to use a building price index. So we'd be looking at something coming back to annually, something being around the 2.3 to 2.5%. So we're starting to see a real plateau come off at the midpoint of next year.
So how do we get access to see what this BPI is? That my understanding that's an industry thing, so you have to actually be a member of the industry and subscribe to, I guess, the accredited.
And I think it's getting in. So there's certainly releases of it on social media, and it's published. The Building Economist as a journal releases and quantifies the building price index, and that's already forecast out. I can certainly get something as a supplementary report, to people watching today. We could certainly be able to get something to them that shows some forecasting.
Very good. So, okay, so all of that has meant, I guess that's meant that people are scared to get into the construction side of things because they didn't know where it was going to end. But it's had a massive, massive knock-on effect to builders where a lot of them, as you said, they took on too much work.
Yep.
Then the costs went up and they simply couldn't meet demand. A lot of builders have actually gone broke. Like, have you got any stats on the number of builders that have gone broke?
Yeah, just this year, it's over 200. I mean, if you talk about last year with Condev and Build Corp, you're talking about just between them about 2.5 billion in construction that they're no longer around. There were many residential home builders that had somewhere between 50 and 250 homes on their books that are just gone, that don't exist anymore, and are half built. So the problem there is that we see a rise in construction costs purely through risk, because a new builder coming in is going to want to charge more to finish that property off because they've got to carry the risk of the previous builder, whether their trades weren't paid or the workmanship isn't there, right? So that helps to pump up this cost increase that we're seeing across the market. In regards to, I touched on it before, liquidation. We had 3,917 companies go into liquidation in the last financial year, and 28% were builders. So there were certainly big numbers. Metricon was certainly a well publicised one, right? Because
Harry's gone fine.
Yeah. Harry just aged. He's now probably 100 with that comment. But certainly Metricon. They had a big issue where they thought they would trade out of it and sort of said to all their sales staff, sell like crazy, and that didn't work. So then they had to put about 250 staff off. They sold over 4,000 vacant land titles that they had just to help recover costs. And they got about 16 or 17 million back just from that. But they had to offload a lot of their display homes and sell them just to help recover costs.
Yeah, crazy times, like seriously crazy times. So, okay, so we're about to plateau, but we've got a whole bunch of builders that no longer exist. So, lack of, I guess, builders in the pipeline.
Yeah.
The HIA, I guess, saying that we're actually at record lows with the number of building commencements at the moment. So. Is that a combination of lack of supply or lack of demand for I guess, building at the moment?
Look, I think the demand is there. The problem is we've got a smaller pool of builders to actually do the work. So we've still got jobs that need to be finished off from existing builders. So I think the numbers are true, right? That there's not many jobs commencing, but there's still a lot that need to be done, right? So the reality is that there aren't as many builders to choose from. You want to use this local builder, but they're booked out for the next 12 months. So you can use them, but you're going to have to wait a year before you start your job.
which means you have to factor that into your feasibilities up front, including the fact that, well, if I have to wait a year for that to commence, not only have I got the holding costs right now, but I've got potential increase in construction that's going to occur by the time they actually sign the contract.
You've got cost escalations that you now have to cover off.
Yeah. So tricky times for the next little while, but the good news is, I guess the plateau in the middle of the year means that things are going to start to stabilize and become a little bit more predictable. As we start to get a heck of a lot more demand for the actual stock itself. You touched on the number of homes that were actually destroyed, but we're actually at, I guess, record number of population increase at the moment due to international migration, with 400,000 people a year, I guess, over the next few years coming into Australia, all of them needing somewhere to live. That's going to create a massive demand on existing stock, and then I guess the existing stock from a rentals perspective means rents have gone through the roof. And I guess pretty soon that's going to make the cost of construction seem insignificant, because it's going to be cheaper to actually build and own your own home than it will be to actually rent.
I think there's been a little bit of doom and gloom with what we've been talking about, right, Rob? And we're trying to paint a picture of what has, and there's still a little bit more pain to come. But maybe I'm just that optimist, but I certainly see a real silver lining coming in the property market in the next couple of years. I think that there's a massive demand coming for property, and we're starting to see that plateau of construction costs. And let's be honest, if we know what the construction cost is, we can work around that, right? What has been the concern is we didn't know, and it just kept on going up and up, and you don't want that rise and fall that we can't sort of track and monitor and recoup. So the reality is that once we start to get a plateau in construction costs, wherever the dust may settle, it will be more of a known entity, the construction costs, and we won't suddenly be seeing plasterboard drop or increase 2 weeks. You should have placed that order a month ago because now it's 30% more. We're not going to be seeing that.
A lot more predictable, so which means a lot easier to actually work out where we're going and what that's going to do. But mate, I'm with you. I'm an optimist. I'm seeing this next little while, with interest rates being a little bit tight, I think interest rates are going to start to come off in the not too distant future. And then when that happens, because of the demand and because of the predictability of things, I think it's to the moon, mate. I think the market is going to take off significantly. And I've got, without being self-serving here, I'm running an event in a couple of weeks' time where we're talking about reading the market and being able to see what's actually coming. So
I 100% agree with you. And if for the people listening and watching, if you aren't going to that, I'm not at that event, right? But get to it, because I just think that the next 18 months to 2 years, there's going to be a real shift in the property market. There is a massive shortage of housing. There will be more builders around that will be coming through. Stock is so hard to get. And I think if you're that budding developer where you can get some stock or you can get a development going, you are not going to have a problem moving it. You are not going to have a problem getting it rented, that's for sure. And if you have to move it, you're not going to have a problem there. We talk about real estate agents talking about now, they just cannot get stock.
No, absolutely. And for anyone interested, the link on that is down below. It is on the 20th of August. So depending upon when you're watching this recording, you may have missed it, and there is no playbacks or anything like that. So, mate, I see the next 2 to 3 years in our industry a lot more predictable, a lot more stable, and
for everyone, I think that's the important thing too, right? Because it's we've got the budding developer or the experienced developer watching this, and they're looking through a certain lens at that, right? But equally, if a builder has certainty around what his or her construction costs are, and they're comfortable with the signing of the contract and a commencement date, and that they're not going to have this sudden, right? It's better for everyone, right? So I think that the idea of that leveling out is good for all parties. The end consumer wanting to buy it, the real estate agent trying to move it, a marketer trying to sell it. It's all about, no one wants to be the marketer on a development saying this is what they're worth, and then through that cycle having to try and increase costs, right? I think for the whole property industry, it's a really good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So With the number of builders that have actually gone under, I guess, when do you see that recovery? Because in my humble opinion, there's some pretty systemic issues in our building industry across the board with regards to what it actually takes to actually become a builder and get a builder's license. Because it's not really aimed at business people. It's aimed at tradies trying to step up, but they're not necessarily trained in all the right things to run a business.
No, that's right, and we've seen that for years with trades. And if we took it off the line of building just for a second and went on a very small tangent, if you're a mechanic and you're working on a car, does that mean that you can run an automotive business or a mechanic shop? I mean, there's one thing about you're a very, very good purveyor of fixing a car, but do you have the skills to manage a team of mechanics, to do good customer service, to manage the timeframes and the logistics? And that's what we're saying about builders, right? You can be a trained plumber or a chippy or a sparky or a carpenter or whatever, and you become, I think I can actually be the head builder on this job. I think I should get my ticket and do that. It's one thing to be doing one small part of the build, the carpentry, the erection of the frames, or a mold out, or a plumber, doing the pipe, to then taking on the whole responsibility of the whole site, taking on the risk of all of the insurances, and now negotiating contracts with other subcontractors where before you were just doing your own tender. So there's a vast difference in a builder, and my personal belief is that there has to be a strong emphasis around project management and business skills, fiscal knowledge and skills, not just the purveyor of I can erect that or I can install that.
Yeah, so I guess the financial side, so there's the cash flow management, there's project management, so understanding where the project is, what is a thing called critical path, and where are the roadblocks actually going to occur, so I can get my scheduling right and get my cash flow side of things right. All those sorts of things, I guess, are super important, and they're not taught that. They're basically, you need to be a tradie, you need to have worked for a builder, and just because you work for a builder does not necessarily make you a great business person. No. And I think systemically, if this is, I guess, any of the building authorities out there, so I'm not aiming at any one, but collectively, need to put a lot more emphasis on the actual business management side of this, and perhaps remove the requirement to actually be a builder and be more of an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think it's about the reality that it seems a lot easier to become a commercial builder in this country than it does a residential builder, right? And the reality there is, it shouldn't be. The skills, we should be looking at builders that, when you're a tradesperson and you have to, in say New South Wales, submit 2 years of pay slips, or other states it's different. Queensland, I think, is a bit longer, but that doesn't make you a builder, right? That's not teaching you about having to exceed a client's expectations, or even understand what a client's expectations are on a certain build, or being able to forecast, time programs and delays and critical paths and those sort of things. And certainly the short courses that go along with that, I don't think go into enough detail. And yet you can go and do a university bachelor's degree where you go into the absolute detail and have to do big analysis around those kind of things. And that's not rewarded from a builder side of things. I just don't know whether we're looking at it holistically.
No, and I think you've got some stats on that we were talking about before, that the Association of Professional Builders did a whole bunch of stats on, I think it was 750 odd builders that they surveyed. Yep. What was some of the findings that they came out of that?
Yeah, so they found out that 79% of all of those builders couldn't calculate their work in progress payments, so their WIPA. And that's really understanding when monies are going out and when monies are coming back in from a builder's point of view. They worked out that 90% of those builders didn't have an objections manual, so they didn't understand when things were going wrong. 80% of those builders didn't have a project management tool that they were using. And conversely, 50% of those builders were currently in negative equity.
Which explains a hell of a lot why, when they took on all of that extra workload, they just weren't prepared for the impacts of that when things outside of their control, I guess, started happening around the COVID and the supply chains and the costs on that.
Yeah, and I think that just ties back to our, previous 5 minutes talking about, business side of being a builder, right? Those things of, the company, your company being in negative equity, not having a project management tool that you're using, not being able to understand when monies are going out, when monies are coming back in. They're all business type skills that every industry uses in different ways. And yet, we're now seeing all these builders going under. So is the emphasis on being able to swing the S-swing on site, or being able to run a company and employ people to do various tasks?
Yeah. So I was about to say the good news, but there's no good news in builders going broke. But I think the ones that have survived now have proven that they can stand those sorts of things, and so they're more likely to be, I guess, more fiscally aware. So the ones that are still standing are probably a lot more robust and probably a lot more reliable moving forward. So given that's the case, can we feel confident in the building industry moving forward from here?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're going to have to be patient for a little while. We're not going to be able to get our development started next week. And as developers, we want to get in and get started so we get our returns, right? Whether that be income through rental or sale, right? We want to hit that market at the right time, so we're getting maximum price. So we're just going to be a bit patient with some of that and compromise somewhat, because to work with the builder that you want to work with, you might have to wait. So we've got to be careful not to just be in a rush that we do want to start, and therefore we overpay because we're paying for that service. I think we'll learn certain things on the back of COVID, where we should now be having conversation with builders about, well, what are the other jobs that you're working on? Like, how many jobs can you do a year? How many are you currently on? So we can understand that we don't want to be necessarily working with a builder that has got 10 other jobs on the go at the moment, right? That they haven't, when we and ask them, of those 10 jobs, where are they up to? Oh, this has just started. This one's just about to finish. Have an understanding of where you're in that pipeline, because that's going to help for you to understand really where you are in regards to when they get going.
Yeah, absolutely. So now, in order to, there's still, I'm going to say we still need to be alert, but not alarmed is probably the right way to frame that. So in moving into any new building and construction contract moving forward, what are the sorts of things that we're starting to see now start to creep into our contracts? And that's something, what do we need to actually be aware of to protect ourselves from those, I guess, price escalations?
Yeah, so we're starting to see builders put in clauses that allow them to include rise and fall. So being able to sort of modify that agreed lump sum contract price of, say, $1 million for the build, being able to, during the duration of the build, increase that value because they've got to now pay more for timber, or the price they originally allowed for brickwork in that is now dearer, so I'm going to pass that on. So it'd be treated like a variation, but it's kind of like a variation that instantly gets approved, as opposed to you being able to say, well, no, we're not going to cop that. That's something to really watch out for, and certainly around liquidated damages at the end of a job. We're seeing builders really wanting to drag that down to nothing if possible. So what that really means is that if the job goes late after the forecast practical completion in the contract, that normally there would be a rate of liquidated damages which help to cover the holding costs that the developer would be carrying. Builders are trying to get that down, as they always have, but there's certainly a fair bit of venom around trying to get it down low as possible, because they are aware that because of the volatility of programming in the last, say, 2-3 years, they don't want to get caught with having to pay liquidated damages because they've now had to wait an extra 2 months for a particular long lead item that they never really had to worry about before.
Yeah, so, and they're compensating for that by trying to, one, lower the LDs, and two, blow out the timelines so that liquidated damages don't actually trigger. So, that means that we have to factor in longer holding costs into our projects and things like that. So, I guess the tip that I would say to our community is to say, if you want to have a particular build by a particular time, so you can say to a builder, hey, how much will it cost to build this? And you're at the mercy of them for the time. Or you could say, hey, I'd like to have this built in 9 months. What will that cost?
Yeah.
And so if you're wanting that certainty of time, you can cap your holding costs, but you're going to pay a little bit more because the builder has to ratchet up their risk factor for that.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to I'm not sure who came up with this sort of comment, but you can have fast, you can have cheap, and you can have high quality, but you can't have all of them. You only have two of them at any one time.
Yeah.
And so the reality is that if you're saying to a builder, well, I need to start tomorrow and I need it in 9 months, you're going to pay a little bit more for it, right? It's not to say it can't happen, but you have to pay a bit more for it. But if you aren't in a hurry and you want high quality, then you have to wait a bit longer. So that sort of analogy, it really does work across a lot of sort of sectors, but it certainly resonates for me in the construction industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the other thing about those rise and fall clauses, just to call it out, builders clearly want to capture that to try and protect themselves, but the financiers don't want that still. I guess because they want to know exactly what it is that they're actually funding. They don't want to get to a point where they're 3/4 of the way through the project and suddenly you're putting your hand out going, hey, I want a bit more cash to kind of finish this off.
And we're seeing that with banks have come to the table a little bit on that. So if we go back pre-COVID, really with financial estimating, there's a fairly standard industry norm around contingencies, and that was around 5% of the contract sum, depending on the job. For the renovation, it might have been up to sort of 8%, but you start to see now, builders will be saying, banks will be sort of saying, or how about 10% or 10 to 15%? So they can see that they're starting to do that. Now, when you're starting to go to a bank and you've done your gross realisation, you're trying to borrow money from a bank, and they're sort of in the background allowing an extra 10 or 15% for contingency. I mean, this is starting to put pressure on whether this development stacks or not, right? So your ability to get finance at a reasonable rate, is starting to apply pressure. If we were talking about that being a government job, there's pretty well an absolute line, bold, underline, italicised, 30% contingency applied straight away. So the reality there is that we certainly want to monitor that and be aware of that, and that's where you want to try and get that certainty around from a builder that you don't have a rise and fall, because the banks will be looking for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we mentioned before they're pushing their timelines out, that sort of thing. What are you seeing, I guess, with regards to some stats that sit around how long projects are actually taking to actually complete now compared to where they were 2 years ago?
Yeah, so during COVID, we certainly saw it blow out on average to around 16 weeks increase per job. The current stats for that kind of same analysis, when we looked at about 1,000 jobs, is now back to about 11 weeks. So we are starting to see that come back. It should have come back a lot more than that now, but what that is, what we're just talking about, builders are still keeping a little bit of fat in there or float. When we talk about program, in cost we talk about fat, in program we talk about float. They're adding in a little bit of that extra time, just to certainly give themselves a buffer, that if there is a delay, they're not breaching a contract. So we're still sort of seeing that, and certainly at one-offs, we've seen jobs when we're talking about unit developments, not just a duplex or what have you. We're certainly seeing generally that being out a few months, sort of 3 months.
Yeah. So we've got, I guess, not quite a magic bullet with regards to I guess this sort of things, but we need to watch out for those rise and fall clauses. Make sure that they're there. We're going to cap. Are we seeing lots of changes? Are they trying to sneak that into like provisional sums and prime costs with that rise and fall? Is that where they're sneaking it in?
Yeah, we see it a little bit there. I think a way around that is in a lot of the construction contracts in Australia, you'll have the ability to have a schedule of rates. So for anyone who's got a pen and paper there, make sure you write down a schedule of rates. Now, in most contracts, there'll be a couple of primary offenders, right? Bricklayer, plumber, electrician, right? Now, I would think that you have the ability to add some extra ones there. Now, what that is so a schedule of rates for, say, an electrician, you might put in $65. So what that basically means is if there's a variation on the site and you needed the electrician to do some extra works, you've already agreed on what his hourly rate will be to do that. So if you now needed some extra lights in, you can work out the cost of the extra lights, and you already know the hourly rate, as opposed to waiting for it to be re-quoted. My sort of at the moment with the rise and fall, get some extra trades put in there. Agree on what some of those extra costs will be, as opposed to a builder sending you a letter halfway through a build saying, I had to get some extra timber or the price for timber went up. So this is what it is. We're increasing our contract sum by 10%. You don't want to get to a point where there's a standoff where without signing that, the builder's going to stop. Try and get some of that stuff in the schedule of rates. You've got the opportunity to modify a contract, add another line and write maybe some of these key things down or other trades down that they might indicate. Ask them if they're saying they want rise and fall included because they're worried about costs going up. Like what? Give me an example. Oh, I don't know, like concrete. All right, great. Let's write down concrete and get some certainty around the unknown.
Yeah, and so some of the other things that to be considered would be pre-ordering materials well in advance. So I can lock in the price by paying for it today and ordering it today, and I don't need it for 3, 4, 5 months. Am I happy to stick it in my shed and have it sit there? It might cost me a little bit cash flow wise, but we can cap our losses or our rises in costs from a materials perspective just by pre-ordering where humanly possible. So chat to your builder about what can they actually do. Do they have somewhere to store that material, that sort of thing?
Yeah, look, I think that another way around that is certainly get a tender let document going. So there's another one for a pen and paper, right? Tender let. So what that is at the start of a job, you sign a builder up and he's going to do it for $1 million. He will then, or she will go away and get individual trades. So they're going to go and subcontract to an electrician and to a plumber and to a plasterer and to a form worker, into a concreter, all these things. They're going to go and sign these individual contracts between themselves and the subcontractor. And you sign the one head contract between the head contractor or the builder. Now, you can get a list, you can request a list of what trades have been let. So at the start of a job, that builder should really have the concrete trade let very early because they're starting next week, right? They've already got a price in from those. So find out what trades have been let. Now, what I'm saying there is that if he or she, the builder, has said, oh, we've got the electrician signed off, we've got the plumber, we've got the price in and we've accepted it, so that trade has been let, then halfway through a job, if they're coming back to you saying, oh, plumbing's gone up, you go, well, hang on, we signed a contract for it. You've signed a contract for it. I've seen that you've already secured them, right? Get eyes on your project.
Absolutely. I cannot stress that stuff enough. The other one would be get a schedule or a program of works mapped out up front. So this is from a project management perspective, this is your work breakdown structure or every single task that needs to actually occur. You want that mapped out in stone so you know what that project timeline is. So when should the slab be down? When should the frames be up? All those sorts of things. Yep. So then you can have intelligent conversations at your weekly meeting with your builder to go, well, you said you were going to be at this point. Where are you actually at?
Yeah, and I think it's taking it to the next level because a builder will say, oh, yeah, that's all right. We can make that up. I know we started the slab a week late, but we can make that up. Where are you going to make it up? Because you've provided me a program. Let them tell you where that float is if that's the case, because you want them to really think about it. It's easy to sort of just, I guess, close down the conversation. But yeah, it'll be okay. We've got some extra time. We can make it up. Get them to commit to that answer. No, but where? How are you going to do that? And you'll start to get a sense of whether they're across it or not, right? So the reality there is they might say, oh, because we've allowed for 30 wet days. All right, yeah, but we've already had 10 wet days, right? You need to start to get them to be updating that program and certainly giving not, oh, yeah, but we'll make it up, it's all good. Find out how they're going to make it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, mate, I think we've covered all of that sort of things off pretty well, but it would be very remiss of me, now that I've got a QS in front of me, to not ask the $1 million question on every single developer's, lips, and that is, what's the cost of construction? How do they work this out in the early days of their project? Can you give them any tips and tricks on what it is that they can actually do to make sure that they get their feasibility within the right order of magnitude right up front, even before they've got potentially a design in place?
Yeah, it's get in touch with a quantity surveyor as early as you possibly can. I mean, we certainly have clients that will say we've put an option on a block of land or a property that we want to buy, so we need to get some idea around it, right? So we are used to working in the sphere of needing to get something done before it is fully designed. The reality would be there is have an idea of what you're potentially going to do. Now, I understand you're not going to be deciding what floor finishes might be going in yet, but having an idea of what you might want to build on it, and have a conversation with the quantity surveyor really early, because the reality is they can help you build up that scope and they can help to document that. So as opposed to just coming back to you and saying, oh, you want to do a resi job, yeah, allow 2,000 square metre, and then you go away and work out how many square metres you want to actually build on it. Have a conversation, with them about, look, we're thinking about building some townhouses on it, and we're thinking about doing them as double story or single story. We're not sure if we can get 5 or 6 on here. We can do different options. We can do 3 options. Let's do 3 or 4 or 2 or 1 or what have you. And we can start to build that up. And a good quantity surveyor should be able to work with you and say, right, are we just going to allow carpet to all living areas and tiles to wet areas? Or are we going to allow polished timber? Or are we going to, bricks are really hard to get at the moment. So if we went a lightweight cladding for the second story, that would help you. They can help you value engineer on those kind of things. But you need to have that conversation pretty early, and they'll be able to build that price up. A good quantity surveyor that's worked on many jobs doesn't necessarily need all the internal walls drawn yet. They just need to get an idea of what you're going to be putting on it and get that benchmarked. Get a list of benchmark jobs. Okay, here are another 5 other jobs that we're working on in the same area, and this is what it's coming in at as a cost per square metre. They're not getting rid of confidential information because they're not giving the address of the other property or the entity of the other property, but certainly can say, well, there's an 8-story townhouse development going in here, or there's this or that, and certainly get an idea of what those costs are.
Absolutely. So, mate, been an absolute pleasure getting to know you. Any final parting words of wisdom that you'd like to give our audience?
Yeah, I think program is a real key one for me. It's something that I think you really need to do. Get a quantity surveyor in early, but get a resource loaded program from your builder that will tell you, what, because if they won't be able to resource load it, that means, do they understand how many bricklayers they're going to have when they're doing the brickwork? Do they understand how many plumbers are they going to have on the site? Because that will tell you, if they can't answer that, whether they've actually got it tendered or not yet, right? Whether they've really had that conversation with that trade as yet. That will help to give you an idea of where their mindset is. It will certainly draw a line in the sand that they know exactly what you're talking about. You're already across a job. So they're going to have to be able to give that information back to you. So certainly I would be getting in and around that.
Very good, mate. Thank you very much for that. It's been an absolute pleasure. Now, Marty, you presented at our meetups in the past, but we run these meetups now in 4 states, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. So we're pretty much running an event every single weekend of the year, which makes Rob a very busy boy.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to turn up to one of those, I'm sure we'll get Marty back to one of those in the very near future. So click on the links below, folks. And it's been an absolute pleasure, Marty. So thank you very much for your time, mate.
Yeah, anytime.
All good. Thanks mate.
Rob.
Bye for now.